Hello Year 5 and welcome to your history lesson for today. So we're going to be looking at how the Mayan society was organised. Okay, so there'll be links to the way our society is organised nowadays, but we're going to go back and look about the different hierarchies of people within the Mayan society. So what we're going to do first is we're going to start off with some retrieval practice. Okay, so I have 3 questions I'd like you to answer. 1, who was the first person to discover the Americas in 1492? So we looked at this in our first lesson. What is another name for the Spanish explorers who fought to take over the Aztecs' land? Okay, that was also from lesson 1. That was one of the really big words. What is the name of the area of America where many societies formed before the invasion of the Spanish? Okay, so what I'd like you to do is pause the video and have a go at answering those questions, and then we'll go through the answers together. Okay, so the first person to discover the Americas was actually Christopher Columbus, okay? So he was the explorer who was the first one to cross over the Atlantic Ocean and go and explore the Spanish islands. What is the name of the Spanish explorers? Well, they were called the conquistadors, okay? So they were a group of the Spanish who were led by the Mexican, and they went and they fought against the Aztecs and actually took over their land. Now, another name for the Americas, where the societies had formed for the Mayans, was known as the Mesoamerica. Okay, so at the moment, Mesoamerica, that's pretty much the south of the North of America, and the very, very tip of the South America. So it's all around where those Caribbean islands are that join between North and South America. So well done if you remembered all of those, because they were all from our first lesson. So well done if you've managed to retrieve that. So what I would like you to do is pause the video and consider these 4 questions. How is our society run? Who makes our decisions? Who is in charge? And how do they come to be in this position? Okay, so think about what you might have seen on the news at the moment and all the different important people that we have within our society, and have a think about those 4 questions. So pause the video and just have a think. Okay, so United Kingdom, so where we are, has what we call a constitutional monarchy, okay? So we know what monarchy is because we've looked at this in our Tudor topics. This is when we have a king or queen who reigns over the country. However, in our country, okay, we actually have the government. Okay, so we have a government that's run by the Prime Minister who is in charge, and it's the government that actually makes the decisions and the rules for the country. Now, this is overseen by the Queen. So when we have to pass some legislation or some rules through Parliament and they pass a bill, so that's why they pass a new law, it has to be signed off and agreed by the Queen. But ultimately, the government are the ones that are in charge of making those decisions, okay? So here in this picture, you can see this is the Houses of Parliament. So this is where the MPs, the members of Parliament, will go and they'll meet within the House of Commons or the House of Lords, and they'll decide how the country should be run. Now, we've come across the Houses of Parliament before when we looked at the gunpowder plot back in November. Now, our society is a democracy. Okay, so democracy means that the people who live within that country can vote for who they want to be in power. Okay, so every few years we have a time of the year where we vote, a bit like America do at the moment with their president of the United States. They have a period of time where they're allowed to vote for who they want to be in charge. And obviously in our country we have lots of different types of democratic parties. Okay, so at the moment, so we've got Boris Johnson, who's Prime Minister at the moment. So we've got the Labour Party, we have the Conservative Party, we have the Yellow Party, the Green Party, all of those different parties, okay, that are within our society, within our government. And at some point, one of the heads of those parties will then lead our country as our Prime Minister, okay? So, my question to you is, now you know how our society is run, do you think that the Mayan society was organised in the same way? Or do you think that it might have been a bit different? And if you do think it was a little bit different or even the same, why would you think that? So I'd like to pause the video and just jot down some ideas to answer those questions. Okay, well, it was organised, so the Mayan society was actually organised into city-states, okay? So within each of those cities, they had their own king, okay? And that king was in charge of that specific city and over all of his subjects. Subjects are the people within that society. Now, the king actually had what we call nobles to help him to control and run the city-states. It's a little bit like when we have our prime minister and we have our MPs. So our MPs are there to help the prime minister. Now, this type of society is what is known as an absolute monarchy. Okay, so it's completely 100% controlled by the king of that city. Okay, so here we have a picture who is one of the last kings of the Maya, and he's called the Tecnuman. Okay, so he would have been the last or one of the last kings of Maya and would have been in control of one of those specific states. So this map here shows some of the major Mayan city-states that we had. Okay, it's probably one of the famous ones that we know of is Chichen Itza. Okay, and we looked at the Copan the other day. So these are all the different types of states. Okay, and each one of these would have been ruled by a specific king. Okay, so each city has its own king. Now, each city in itself would actually trade with each other. So this is where they would share their resources. But also, they would fight against each other, so they would go to war with each other. Now, we know that even in modern days, that war, or any form of fight, is usually to try and gain additional power, wealth, or even glory. Okay, so there's always a motive or a reason behind it. And that's what sometimes the kings of each of these states would fight for. So here we have each of our different roles. Okay, now we've done it in a pyramid. This is what we call a hierarchy pyramid. So in effect, the higher up you were in the pyramid, the more important that you were. So here we can see at the very, very top, we have the king. And then underneath the king, we have the nobles and the priests. So they're almost like the right-hand people to the king. And then underneath them, we have your palace officials, so the people sort of running of the day-to-day life. And then you have your merchants and your craftsmen. So these were the people that they would take the trade from and export it and import it in. You then have your farmers, who are obviously going to be making a lot of the crops and the materials that are going to be imported or used. You have your labourers, so these are going to be your hard workers, and you have your slaves. So they even had slaves back in the Mayan times. So what we need to consider was, well, what is the role of each one of those people within our pyramid? So the Mayan kings obviously were the most important people. Okay, so they lived in very fine palaces. Obviously they had all the best food. They would have worn the best clothes. They would have done everything they can to show how wealthy and how important they were within society. Okay, now the Maya believed that the kings were actually chosen by the gods. Okay, so this meant that the king's orders and wishes had always got to be obeyed, because effectively if you disobeyed, you were disobeying the laws and the rules put down by the gods. Okay, so here we have a picture of a stele. Okay, so this is the stone slab, okay, that we used to find a lot of the hieroglyphs written on, and it was one of the kings of Quirigua. Okay, so you can see all of the fine headdresses that they had, the fine jewellery, okay, on the earrings that they would have had on, okay. So then we have your nobles and your priests. Now, they were very, very important within the Mayan society, okay, and it was always these people who were educated. So they were always your scribes or your astrologers. So when we go back and we think about the mathematicians that we have, the reading of the stars, we have the Mayan calendar, the hieroglyphs, these would have been the people, the intelligent people that would have given us all of those resources that we have now found from excavating the sites through our archaeology. Now, they were also very, very wealthy and would also live in very grand houses. But also the palace officials were very important. So like I said earlier, they were in charge of the running of the day-to-day life within the city. So they were very important to ensure that flow and ease as society went through day-to-day life. Now, craftsmen would have included anyone, okay, who had some form of skill in a job. One of the very common things in those days was a stonemason, tailor, potter, woodcarver, or jewellery maker, okay. So here we can see some of our artefacts that we would have brought up from the Mayan society. So you've got a Mayan earthenware vase or vase, okay, so this would have been handcrafted by someone, would have been decorated. Here you've got gold and jade. Okay, so these are stones. So the gold and the jade stone were very prized possessions from the Maya, and they would have used those to make jewelry. So they wearing that type of jewelry would also have been a sign of wealth and power. Okay, now merchants would have then bought and sold these goods at markets. So this is how these items would have created a monetary value and would have been exported off to different societies. Now the most ordinary people would have been your farmers. Okay, so they would have lived in very small settlements, very small areas. I know you would have looked at settlements once you did your Romans and your Anglo-Saxons. Now, they would have lived outside of the cities. They wouldn't have been involved in the main city life. Now, they would have lived very simple lives and they would have had very little status. So they were very unimportant in comparison to the rest of the society. Now, many of them would have grown lots of crops such as corn, sunflower, seeds, and cotton. So, a lot of that would have been used for food or either making materials as well. So, although they had a very important job in terms of supplying resources to the society and to the city, they weren't considered very important because it was almost a very dirty job to be doing. It wasn't an important job. So, they lived a very, very simple life. And then you have your labourers and your slaves. So unlike any other society we've looked at before, certainly maybe the Egyptians or the Romans, the slaves and the labourers would have been the very least important people in society. Okay, they would have done a lot of the hard manual labour, so a lot of the building, a lot of the digging, anything that would have required them to work very long hours and very painful jobs. So they would have been building the temples. So you imagine nowadays with all of our machinery, buildings are a bit easier to build, okay? But in those days, they wouldn't have those kind of tools and machinery. So they would have been built by hand, and it would have been the labourers and the slaves who would have had to have done them. Now, they were always very, very poor, and they were also set a very strict certain set of rules. They always had to do what they were told. And potentially, had they not done what they told, there's the potential they would have been punished as well for going against the rules. So your task that I would now like you to have a go at completing is the pyramid in the order of the groups of people that were in the different positions within society. So all the slides that I've just gone through, you now need to have a go at putting them into the correct order within our pyramid hierarchy. What you then need to do is down here underneath, you will need to fill in what the different job roles were for those people in society. Why were they important and what was their purpose? Okay, so I'd like you to have a go at doing that activity, and then we will have a recap on this in our next lesson. Okay, good luck, Year 5.